Okay, go for it.
Good afternoon, everyone. It is 12 o'clock in the afternoon on the eastern seaboard of the United States, and since it's that time, you know what time it is? It's time to hang with Harley. Harley, how are you, buddy?
I'm doing great, V. How are you?
I'm doing great. You and I had a wonderful interview with Marco Zani, which was amazing. The guy is a member of the European Parliament, really in tune with what's going on. So it was a treat. Thank you for setting it up. Thank you so much.
Well, and I think it's important that people can get a different view of what's happening from Europe than what you get
Yeah,
in the media. I mean, if you think about what we're getting now in the media on the so-called Donald Trump Jr. scandal and so on, there's something that they're leaving out, which is, aren't they a little enthusiastic about the fact that there's a ceasefire that's holding in Syria? I mean,
yeah.
isn't that something that's good?
No, no, no. That's never good. Yeah,
Yeah. Well, because we're dealing with a war party. And I
exactly.
think that's what people have to realize is that this is not a difference of opinion about a meeting with a Russian lawyer or whether or not there's hacking going on. This is a grouping that's going after Trump because they do not want to end the regime change policy. They don't
Correct.
want to end the Obama Hillary Clinton war with Russia, war with China policy.
Right.
They don't want to end the bailout of Wall Street policy.
Right.
And what we've got to do is pull together people around the world who are tired of this threat of war that hangs over our head for the sake of defending very narrow private interests. And if we can do that, people like Marco is one. I got to meet a Professor Zhang Weiwei, who is a Chinese scholar who goes back to the Deng Xiaoping reforms,
Hmm.
who gave a lecture here in Berlin a couple of days ago. And it was fascinating because what he said is that what we believe in China is that you have to have nations that act for the good of their people. And he
Right.
said parties in the West, and he was talking about the United States and Europe, parties in the West function for narrow special interests.
Correct.
And he said most people don't like the idea that we have a one party system in China. And he said maybe that'll change someday. But the purpose of the party is to do things for the people.
Correct.
And I think this is an interesting concept that even when I was listening to him at first, I was challenged by it because the idea of a one-party system sort of goes against the idea of freedoms. But he asked the question, do you really have freedom of speech in the United States and in Germany? And he said,
No.
with political correctness, uh, you can say what you want, but will anybody hear it?
Right. Right. Exactly correct.
So I think the importance of having these discussions on a regular basis to get out not just the real news, but to provide an overview, a context for people to see what's going on, so that they realize it's not just people arguing over is Russia good or bad.
Sure.
No, the question is, can we express national interests in cooperation with other nations' national interests, or are we going to be always having to submit to the private interests of a small group of bankers, financial interests, and cartels? And
Right.
that's the fight. So
Right.
it's not just a question of fighting against fake news, it's giving people an understanding of strategic policy from the highest level.
Yes. I agree wholeheartedly, man. And that's the turn of the paradigm that you and I have been talking about for quite some time, and especially Lynn LaRouche and everyone else that's involved. We have to demonstrate to the world that we are capable of striking deals, of making business deals that's mutually beneficial for everyone at large, and simply not you just go ahead and carpet bomb a country because they don't agree with us, or put out some sort of a covert, various different forms of subterfuge out there just so we can create chaos. I mean, my God, for the love of God, Harley, I'm so sick of the United States being the agent of chaos in the world.
Well, and look at the spokesman for that, people like McCain, people like Schumer saying that for Trump to meet with Putin and reach agreements is disgraceful. Tim Kaine, who was Hillary's running mate,
The
saying that
pedophile. He looks like a
yeah,
pedophile.
what he said is that what Trump is doing is treasonous. Now,
Sheesh.
I don't know what his definition of treason is, But acting to stop the potential of a nuclear war does not seem to me to be treasonous. He didn't surrender US sovereignty. Trump is asserting US sovereignty, but he's saying that our sovereignty doesn't necessarily conflict with the national interests of other countries.
Right.
What you see in Europe with the European Union that Marco Zanni was talking with us about yesterday is that nations have surrendered their national interests for some vague and false hope of unity. And what's the goal of unity? It's to protect the biggest banks. So, how does that help a taxi driver in Greece or a factory worker in France or a startup guy in Italy? It doesn't.
Right.
And you've got to find a balance between national interests and international responsibility. And it's not an easy thing to do, especially when all the media is filtering everything toward this idea that you have no alternative but pure globalization, pure deregulation, free trade controlled by the corporations, and so on.
I agree wholeheartedly, man. You know, um, one of the things that was really highlighted during the interview is the views of Europeans towards Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, Russian peace. Do you see the same thing, Harley? Do you see that the masses over there across the pond are really starting to wake up?
Well, I don't know that it's, in Germany, you talk about political correctness.
Oh my God, they're the
This
worst.
election campaign in Germany is pathetic because no one will say anything about anything for fear that they might insult one of their voters. And so you have the general public dialogue is very constrained. But when you get to talk to people one on one, what you find is that they feel terrible that their choice is Merkel or Schultz.
Yeah.
They have a sense that any alternative for the future has been taken away from them. And so, very much like what you saw in the last election campaign in the United States, where the Trump voters were people who said, I may not agree with everything Trump says, but I sure don't want Hillary to be president because she doesn't care what I think. You have that in Europe, and not just in the man in the street. You have it in the institutions in Europe. People like Marco represents a party that's in a coalition that right now is the coalition members are close to 50% in the polls in Italy. That's why he's looking forward to an upcoming election.
Hmm.
In France, if you look at what you had in the election, it was a rejection of the establishment because even Macron was, according to the media, running against the establishment, even though he's the establishment guy. So you have an anti-establishment insurgency around the world. And I thought one of the points Marco made, besides saying that not all Europeans are against Trump, the other thing that he said that was very interesting is this idea that you have emerging in Europe uh, an opportunity to take up the challenge that's posed by the lies of the European Commission and the European Central Bank about the economy. And here they are, they're saying that the banking system is solid, and you have three bailout bail-ins in 1 week. That's not exactly a sign of economic growth and strength.
Yeah. Exactly. Exactly correct. It's amazing to me that you have this incredible vitriol towards anybody who thinks differently from the state, especially in the gelded gynocentric areas like in Germany and in Sweden, where they're blessing themselves with wonderful cultural exchanges that are no longer called rape or terrorism or anything like that, but they've gone into a type of sadomasochistic, self-inflicted self-immolation that's happening there. And it's a tragedy. It's a tragedy, and I'm hoping. I mean, and Harley, you're there in Germany, and I'm hoping that the people in Germany, that there's some sort of um you know, uh, waking up that is happening. And I know, like in
Well,
Austria, there's a huge wake up movement that's happening. And I just want to know if that's also occurring as well. Do you see that?
yeah, V, we're seeing that.
Perfect.
Mrs. Rush made the comment the other day that for the first time after the meeting with Xi Jinping, the German Chancellor Merkel talked about the prospects for Germany and China working together in Africa.
Hmm.
Now, up till now, Germany's policy toward Africa was a kind of neo-colonialism,
Yeah.
where the Germans went in and they said, "We want you to have our form of transparency." And the Africans are now saying, "Yeah, you mean like Deutsche Bank?"
Hmm.
But the Germans are saying, "You need our form of transparency, our form of anti-corruption. You have to have risk guarantees, and then we'll come in." And the Africans are saying, "Well, we aren't being told the same thing by the Chinese. They're coming in and they're partnering with us."
Sure.
And so I've been watching this through meetings I've been going to with this group called the Africa Verein, where there's been a growing outspokenness of African governments who are saying, we need technology, we need engineering, and the Germans are the best in the world at it, but we don't need German arrogance and the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and Deutsche Bank. And what's interesting, I don't know if you've followed this, but recently Deutsche Bank has made some agreements with the Asia Infrastructure Investment Bank and with the Chinese government. So they're now partnering with the Chinese in a couple of major projects, including this railroad in, or this, I'm sorry, hydropower plant in Angola and certain other things. So what I'm seeing is that in the business community in Germany, the small and medium enterprises, people who usually associate with the Christian Democrats, Merkel's party, but are angry about the sanctions against Russia. They're angry about the government's policy toward Africa, toward the Middle East, and they're also angry about the refugees.
Yeah.
Now, the solution to the refugees is not just tightening the border. There's some of that should be done. The solution is stop the damn wars.
Correct.
Make these circumstances livable in places like Syria. Now you've got this ceasefire. You've got the Chinese going in talking about rebuilding cities. The German economic development minister named Mueller, North Africa.
Hmm.
And yet the policy still of the British and the French is to support this phony government in Tripoli in Libya, which is basically overrun by jihadists. So the Russians are working with General Haftar in Libya.
Yeah.
And what they're talking about is building, going back to the building policies that Gaddafi had. So if the Germans can be brought into this with the Chinese, then the situation will shift. And one other thing on these small and medium enterprises in Germany, these are very skilled people who really work their asses off. The
Sure.
problem with the small and medium enterprises is that you have people who put 16 hours a day in keeping their business going.
Right.
And they are having trouble getting credit from banks, even though they're solid businesses. But when they actually take the time to sit down and talk, you hear the grievances come out. And the biggest grievance is there's not a single party that represents their interests right now in Germany. And
Yeah.
so some of these people are very, very intrigued by what Trump is doing, what happened with Brexit, what's going on in Italy. And also they're watching to see what happens in France. Is Macron going to continue the policies of the French establishment, or is he going to break with them? So I think what you can see from Europe is beyond the headlines and beyond the fake news is a real potential revolution underway. And it's a revolution going back to what Charles de Gaulle stood for, which was a Europe of sovereign nation states that collaborate together for development in Eurasia.
Right.
And that was set back by the student riots that got rid of de Gaulle. Remember, de Gaulle was targeted for assassination at the same time Kennedy was killed by the same networks. Basically, what we would call today deep state networks that used
Correct.
various kinds of hit operations to kill leaders. Mattei, who was the Italian leader of the Italian National Oil Company, was also part of that network, and his plane was sabotaged. So we're for a break back toward what John Kennedy was doing with de Gaulle and others. That's what's necessary right now.
Yes. Absolutely correct, man. I think it's I think nationalism is the only thing that's going to save Europe. And you know what's amazing? It's how resistant the Eastern European countries are. Like how look at what's happening in Poland. They're not putting up any sort of they're not giving any slack to any of this European quotas for migrants. They have zero migrants coming in, and thus they have zero problems.
Well, they also don't use the euro. They still use the zloty, as I
Yep,
just found out from being in Poland not too long ago. I couldn't use my euros.
that's
A
right.
lot of the Eastern European countries are not going into the so-called core Europe because they're suspicious, as Marco said, they're suspicious of the European Central Bank and the European Commission. Now, I would make the point that we're really talking about a form of economic nationalism as the key to development of these countries. And you do have people who will argue my country over every other country on the basis of sometimes misguided patriotism, sometimes just love of country. But when you combine that with economic policies that actually build things, that's how you get out of this crisis. And you have one of the things the Chinese fellow Dr. Zhang said the other day is that you have in the West, government is seen as a necessary evil. And he said, we've got
Right,
to make government a necessary good. And by
correct.
that he means that the governments do what's needed and nothing else.
Correct.
I think this is where we start looking at this question of how do you deal with the banking crisis? You can't have banks loaded with non-performing assets and derivative debt that are going to function to build an economy. The investment in the real economy is against their interests. And
Right,
unless you have laws that force them to invest in the real economy, they're going to continue the swindles and the bubble making until the bubble pops and then the governments come in and bail them out. So I think that's where we see the the potential for a popular movement for economic nationalism across the whole transatlantic nations.
yeah. Yeah, I agree with that. I agree with that wholeheartedly. Harley, we got about 2 minutes left. Why don't you give out your closing comments as well as how people could follow the work that you do over at LaRouche Pack?
Well, we're putting up a lot of very interesting material on LaRouche Pack right now. LaRouchePac.com. If this interview or this speech by Dr. Zhang Weiwei is up in the next couple of days, I would really encourage people to listen to it. I don't agree with everything he said, but I think what he did is present a very systemic view of how the Chinese think about things. And it would be very interesting for people who have bought this line that China is a bubble economy and that China has uh, benefited exclusively from piracy of U.S. intellectual property. And
Such nonsense.
I mean, they've gone beyond that. They've actually gone to the point of doing things that we used to do and doing them quite well. So go to LaRouchePac.com, and when you have it up on Rogue Money, people should listen to this interview with Marco Zanni. And other than that, think. Be a thinker. We need critical thinking right now more than anything else.
I agree wholeheartedly. Harley Schlanger, thank you so much and allowing us to hang with you yet again on this Thursday afternoon here in the United States. Thank you so much, and enjoy your weekend, Harley. And we'll connect again the following week, folks. Thank you all for listening in. Take it away, CJ.